Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
We're diving deep today into a really critical area, how members of Congress accumulate wealth through their activity in the stock market.
It's a complex topic, touching on potential conflicts of interest, even the risk of insider trading.
Right, and we need to understand if the current rules, like the Stafty Act, are actually, doing the job they were meant to do.
Absolutely. Our goal here is to sort of unpack the history, see where the Stock Act might be falling short.
And also look at some, recent market events. We're in April 2025 now under a second Trump administration and explore what reforms are being talked about.
Yeah, this really goes to the heart of public trust, doesn't it? Trust in elected officials and trust in the integrity of our financial markets.
Definitely. And the concern about lawmakers potentially profiting from their positions, it's not new, is it? It seems to cross party lines.
Not at all. It's been a recurring theme. That's precisely why the Stock Act, the Stop Trading Congressional Knowledge Act, was passed back in 2012.
Can you give us a sense of the kinds of situations that led up to that, some historical examples?
Sure. Even before the Stock Act, there were some, let's say, notable incidents. Think back to the 2008 financial crisis.
Okay.
Representative Spencer Baucus reportedly made some trades that seemed to get against the market right after getting a private briefing on how serious things were.
That sounds like exactly the kind of thing the Stuck Act was meant to prevent.
Precisely. And earlier, in 2005, you had Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist facing questions about his stock sales. There was also an aide to Tom DeLay involved in something controversial.
So these weren't just isolated cases then?
It really suggests more of a systemic vulnerability rather than just, a few bad apples that kept cropping up.
Bringing it more up to date, the trading activity of Paul Pelosi, the husband of the former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, it's gotten a lot of attention. What's significant there?
Well, what stands out with Paul Pelosi's trading is often the sheer volume, the frequency, and the large sums involved, plus the timing, particularly in the tech sector.
Can you give an example?
Okay, take July 2022. The GGPS Plus bill, which was expected to help semiconductor companies, was moving through the Senate.
Right, I remember that.
On the very day it cleared a key Senate vote, Mr. Pelosi sold a large chunk of NVIDIA stock. Interestingly, he'd only bought it the month before while the bill was being discussed. The disclosure actually showed a loss on that sale, which adds another wrinkle.
And there were other instances too.
Yes, July 2024. He sold Visa shares a few months before the Justice Department hit Visa with a major antitrust lawsuit. The stock dropped afterwards. That echoed an earlier situation where he'd sold Google stock before antitrust action against them. And back in 2022, he exercised Alphabet call options, making a reported $5.3 million gain right before a House committee looked at antitrust legislation potentially affecting Alphabet.
The timing is certainly noticeable. And what about their overall portfolio performance?
Reports have suggested pretty substantial growth. One mentioned over 70% growth in a single year, though the specific year wasn't always clear. It's led to, websites and social media accounts dedicated just to tracking his trades. The family's net worth is estimated at well over $240 million, mostly from tech and real estate investments.
What was the official response from Speaker Pelosi's office when these concerns were raised?
The consistent line was that Speaker Pelosi herself doesn't own individual stocks and had no prior knowledge of her husband's trades, that they were managed solely by him and disclosed as required by law.
But the disclosures identify them as spousal trades.
Yes, they do. But the argument was separation. Still, the appearance of potential conflicts generated a lot of criticism. It's worth noting, though, that while she initially pushed back against a trading ban, citing a free market economy, she later seemed more open to considering reforms.
Okay, let's shift to another really key period. The stock trading around the start of the COVID-19 pandemic in early 2020. This seems like a textbook case where non-public information could have been a factor.
Absolutely. Several senators faced scrutiny for trades made after they received confidential briefings about the virus's potential impact, but before the public fully grasped the severity and the markets plunged.
Who were the main figures involved there?
Senator Richard Burr, who was chairing the Senate Intelligence Committee then, stands out. He sold a significant amount of stock in February 2020, including in sectors like hotels and airlines that were about to be hit hard.
And this was after a briefing.
Yes, and just days after he'd co-authored an opinion piece that somewhat downplayed the virus's threat. Later, it came out his brother-in-law also sold stock on the same day after a phone call with Burr.
Were there others?
Oh, yes. Senator Kelly Loeffler and her husband sold millions in stocks after a briefing. They also bought stock in Citrix, a company involved in remote work software.
What was her explanation?
She claimed third-party advisors handled the trades without her input, though reports noted no proof of that arrangement was provided publicly. She later moved away from individual stocks.
And Senator Perdue?
David Perdue was also very active in trading around March 2020. He bought stock in DuPont, which makes PPE, after a briefing, although reports said he didn't attend that specific one. He sold casino stock and bought Pfizer and Netflix.
Similar defense?
Yes. Claimed independent advisors managed his portfolio, and he didn't have a blind trust at the time. He also later sold most individual stocks.
What about Senator Feinstein?
Her husband, Richard Blum, sold a large amount of stock in a biotech company, Allogene Therapeutics. Senator Feinstein stated she didn't attend the relevant briefing and her assets were in a blind trust. Interestingly, that particular stock reportedly went up after the sale. Blum faced scrutiny over other trades, too.
And Senator Inhofe was also mentioned.
Correct. Jim Inhofe also reported selling stock during that period.
So multiple senators, serious allegations, especially given the timing with the pandemic unfolding. What happened with the investigations? Did anyone face charges?
The Department of Justice and the SEC did launch investigations. However, the probes into Feinstein, Loeffler, Inhofe, and Perdue were all closed without any charges being filed.
And Burr. His investigation went on longer, right?
It did, but ultimately that was also closed without charges against him.
So despite all the scrutiny, no charges,
Right.
looking at these cases, Pelosi, the COVID trades, do you see any recurring patterns?
Definitely. You often see trades clustered around significant legislative events or moments when members would likely receive non-public information.
Okay.
The involvement of spouses is also a very common thread. And the defenses often rely on, financial advisors making the calls or assets being in blind trusts, though the effectiveness of those trusts is frequently questioned.
And the lack of prosecutions.
That's consistent, too. Despite the Stochak Act, no member has been successfully prosecuted for insider trading under it. The bar for proof is incredibly high. You have to show specific reliance on non-public material information.
And the speech or debate clause you mentioned?
That's a huge hurdle. It protects legislative acts, making it hard for investigators to get evidence about what a member learned in briefings or official duties. It shields the very information you'd need to prove the case. Spousal trading remains a significant sort of loophole or vulnerability.
Let's really drill down into the Stack Act itself then. Passed in 2012 to fix this, what were its main goals?
The core intent was, first, to explicitly state that, yes, insider trading laws apply to Congress and their staff. No ambiguity there.
Okay.
Second, to boost transparency through more frequent reporting, those periodic transaction reports, or PTRs. And third, to penalize the misuse of non-public information obtained through their jobs.
How did it try to achieve that transparency?
Through the PTRs, members, senior staff, and some executive officials have to report transactions over $1,000 within 30 to 45 days. And importantly, this extends to their spouses and dependent children, too.
Did it include anything else?
Yes, some restrictions on participating in IPOs, provisions for denying pensions if convicted of corruption, and initially it mandated a study on political intelligence gathering. It also originally required online searchable databases for these disclosures.
So has it worked? Has the Stock Act lived up to that promise over the last, 13 years or so?
Well, the general assessment is that it's largely fallen short. Compliance has been a major issue.
How so?
Numerous reports, year after year, show dozens of members failing to file these PPRs on time, or sometimes not filing them at all. Business Insider, the Campaign Legal Center, other outlets have documented this extensively. One report suggested 1 in 7 members in the 117th Congress had violations.
That seems to defeat the purpose of timely disclosure.
It absolutely undermines the goal of letting the public know about potential conflicts in a timely manner. We saw a recent example alleged with Representative Byron Donalds potentially failing to disclose over 100 trades worth, possibly, over $1.6 million in 2022-2023.
And what about deterring actual insider trading? Have there been prosecutions?
That's the other major failing. 0 successful prosecutions of a sitting member of Congress for insider trading under the Stock Act.
Why is that, fundamentally?
2 big reasons. One, the penalty for late filing is just $200. That's, hardly a deterrent for transactions that can involve millions. And even that small fine is often waived by the House or Senate ethics committees.
And the second reason?
The speech or debate clause, again. It remains a massive constitutional shield. making it incredibly difficult for the DOJ or SEC to gather the necessary evidence linking legislative knowledge to specific trades. Past attempts to subpoena congressional staff have run into this wall.
So ethics watchdogs must be pretty critical of the act's effectiveness.
Extremely critical. Groups like CLC, Pew, Go, CRW consistently argue the Stock Act failed because transparency is weak due to noncompliance and low penalties, and enforcement against actual insider trading is basically non-existent due to that constitutional hurdle.
What do they advocate for instead?
Generally, much stronger reforms, typically outright bans on members and their families owning or trading individual stocks. They argue you can't just apply standard enforcement rules in this unique context with its special legal protections.
And didn't part of the transparency get rolled back?
Yes. In 2013, the requirement for easily accessible online searchable databases for congressional staff and executive branch officials was repealed. That definitely weakened the original transparency goals.
So if you had to give the Sestak Act a scorecard from 2012 to now, how would it look?
Affirming insider trading laws apply. Maybe partially met legally, but failed in practice due to no prosecutions. Increasing transparency. Again, partially met there's more data, but non-compliance and the rollback hinder it. Deterring and penalizing insider trading. Failed. Increasing public trust. Clearly failed given low trust levels and persistent scandals.
Okay, let's pivot to the current environment. Here in April 2025, under President Trump's second term, the outline mentions a specific incident involving tariffs and social media. What happened there?
Right, so the administration announced some pretty aggressive reciprocal tariffs on April 2nd, targeting various countries. Predictably, the markets reacted negatively. They declined.
And then?
Then, a few days later, maybe April 9th or 10th, President Trump posts on Truth Social, in all caps, "This is a great time to buy."
Okay, that's quite direct.
Extremely. And what's remarkable is that less than 4 hours later, the White House announces a sudden 90-day pause on almost all those new tariffs.
And the market reaction?
Huge surge. The S&P 500 jumped about 9.5%. Naturally, the sequence immediately triggered accusations of, well, potential market manipulation or tipping.
The question being, did he know about the pause when he told people to buy?
Exactly. Did he have advanced knowledge? His response, when asked, was described as muddled. The White House defense was that he was just trying to, reassure markets.
And there was something about the ticker symbol DJT.
Yes. He sometimes uses DJT in his posts, which is also the ticker for Trump Media and Technology Group, the parent company of Truth Social. He holds a majority stake in TMTG through a trust.
So how did TMTG stock do that day?
It soared, up over 22%, far outpacing the general market surge, even though the company had reported significant losses and wasn't directly impacted by tariff policy. His personal stake value jumped significantly.
Around the same time, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene's trading also came under scrutiny.
Correct. Disclosures showed that Representative Greene, a known Trump ally, made numerous stock purchases on April 8th and 9th, so just before Trump's buy post and the tariff pause announcement.
What kind of stocks?
A range of major companies: Apple, Amazon, FedEx, Nike, Dell, Nvidia, Palantir, JPMorgan Chase, Tesla, others. Many of these had actually dipped after the initial tariff announcement. The reported value was between $21,000 and $315,000. She also sold some treasury bills around the same time.
So buying stocks that were down due to tariffs right before the tariffs were paused.
That's what led to the accusations that she might have benefited from non-public information. Representative Castro called for investigations.
What was her office's response?
They stated her investments are managed by a financial advisor under a fiduciary agreement, and everything was reported according to the STAGA Act. Remember, the act allows 45 days for disclosure, so other trades might not have been public yet. No definitive proof of illegal trading emerged.
Beyond these individual cases, were there any broader market signals suggesting informed trading before the tariff pause?
There was analysis showing a notable spike in bullish call options on the main S&P 500 ETF, ticker SPY, on the day of the pause announcement.
What does that signify?
Well, a sudden jump in buying call options, especially short-term ones that bet on a quick price rise, is sometimes seen by researchers as a potential indicator that some traders might be acting on non-public information ahead of major news. It's not proof, but it's a pattern regulators often look at.
And TMTG, the Trump media stock.
Yeah.
Its performance seems quite tied to politics.
Very much so. It went public via a SPAC merger, and its stock, DJT, has shown extreme volatility. It behaves like a meme stock, where price seems driven by political sentiment around Trump rather than traditional financial metrics like revenue or profit, the company has reported huge losses.
So the surge after the tariff pause wasn't based on fundamentals.
It doesn't appear so. There wasn't a direct link to tariff policy. It seems more tied to his political brand and support base. His ownership creates a direct feedback loop where political events impacting him can boost his financial stake.
The outline also mentions Wall Street ties within the administration. Why is that relevant here?
Both the first Trump administration and this current featured prominent figures from Wall Street in key economic posts. Think Mnuchin, Cohn previously, now maybe figures like Lutnick or Besson.
And the concern there is
Potential regulatory capture, undue industry influence, maybe privileged access to information or policymakers. When you combine that with the president commenting on markets possibly linked to his own interests, policy reversals that benefit allies' trades, and the sheer power of the presidency to move markets.
it fuels perceptions of manipulation or insider dealing, even if it's hard to prove legally.
Exactly. Proving actual market manipulation under SEC rules requires showing deceptive intent, which is difficult, but the appearance of impropriety can be very damaging to public trust. DJT stock itself is kind of an example of political factors overshadowing financials.
Let's dig into the mechanics a bit more. How is non-public information actually exploited in this context?
Well, insider trading fundamentally involves trading on material, non-public information in breach of a duty. The SIAC Act clarified this duty exists for members of Congress regarding official information they receive.
But we already established it's hard to prosecute. Why again?
Several reasons. Defining what's truly non-public in D.C., where information flows constantly, is tricky. Proving a specific piece of policy info was material, meaning important enough to affect a stock price, can be debated. And then, the biggest one, the speech or debate clause, creating that evidentiary barrier.
And options trading. You mentioned the SPY options spike. How does that fit in?
Options offer leverage. A call option lets you bet on a stock going up with less capital than buying the stock itself. Buying short-dated, out-of-the-money calls, betting on a significant, quick price jump can be a sign of strong, bullish conviction.
So unusual activity there is a red flag.
Academic research suggests unusual volume in options, especially those out-of-the-money calls, often precedes major corporate news like mergers, suggesting some traders knew something. The SPY spike before the tariff pause could be seen in that light, related to government action. Paul Pelosi's frequent use of options also fits this pattern of potentially informed bets. It's not proof, but it's a data point.
Okay, then there's the whole issue of blind trusts. Are they truly blind? How effective are they?
The theory is great. Hand your assets to an independent trustee, you don't know what they're doing, conflict solved. Many officials use them. But there are significant criticisms.
Like what?
First, the official knows what assets went into the trust initially. Unless the trustee immediately sells everything and reinvests, which often doesn't happen, that initial knowledge persists.
So if there isn't much trading?
Right. If there's low turnover, the official still basically knows what they own. Also, while specific instructions are barred, some general communication about performance is allowed. And crucially, even if you don't know individual stocks, you might know you're heavily invested in, say, the energy sector. That could still influence how you approach energy policy.
Are they practical for everyone?
They can be costly and complex to set up properly, which might be a barrier for less wealthy officials. Plus, history fuels skepticism. Senator Frist's HCA stock sale from his blind trust raised eyebrows years ago.
So some reforms propose stricter versions.
Yes, the idea of a truly blind trust sometimes comes up, meaning one that mandates initial divestment and reinvestment. That's stricter than the current qualified blind trust, or QBT standard under law, and stricter than what the Trust Act proposes. The Ethics Act, as we noted, just rejects QBTs for prohibited assets altogether.
The outline also mentions a psychology of impunity. How might that play into why questionable trading persists?
It's the idea that if rules aren't enforced or penalties are trivial, people might start to feel like the rules don't really apply to them or that they can get away with bending or breaking them.
A culture of impunity.
Potentially. The consistent failure to prosecute congressional insider trading, the small, often waived fines for disclosure violations, these could foster a sense that the risks are very low. Combine that with the power and information access that comes with the job.
And maybe officials push ethical boundaries.
It's a plausible contributing factor. Using complex tools like options or trading through spouses or relying on disputed blind trusts might add layers of complexity that make accountability harder. perhaps reinforcing that feeling of being insulated from consequences. It connects to broader concerns about systemic weaknesses where formal rules are undermined.
This seems to lead directly into the path for reform. There's a renewed push now, in 2025, to ban or restrict congressional stock trading, right?
Yes, definitely. The momentum seems stronger now, maybe fueled by the COVID-era trades and these more recent incidents. There are several concrete proposals on the table.
What are the main ones?
Two key bills are the Trust in Congress Act and the Ethics Act. The Trust Act would require members, spouses, and dependent kids to either sell off covered investments, like individual stocks, or put them in a qualified blind trust, a QBT.
And that has bipartisan support.
Yes, quite a bit. Over 65 co-sponsors last I checked, support from watchdog groups. It's sitting in the House Administration Committee.
Okay, and the Ethics Act?
The Ethics Act is stricter. It proposes an outright ban on purchasing covered investments, stocks, crypto, etc. for members, the president, VP, soon after enactment. And it mandates selling off all existing such assets by a set date, maybe March 2027.
And
Crucially, it does not allow holding these banned assets in a QB2. It rejects that approach. It also includes much steeper penalties, like a month's salary or 10% of the asset value, and requires a searchable online database. It passed a key Senate committee late last year.
Are there other ideas floating around?
Some variations propose absolute bans on even owning individual stocks, requiring divestment, maybe with longer timelines for complex assets or some tax relief to ease the process.
So comparing these, the core difference is the blind trust question.
That's the fundamental split. Trust Act says divest or use a QBT. Ethics Act says divest, period. It reflects that deep disagreement about whether QBTs actually solve the conflict problem.
What about who is covered and what assets are banned?
The scope varies a bit. Some include the president, VP, judiciary, senior staff. The types of assets targeted are fairly similar. Individual stocks, bonds, options, crypto usually banned, diversified mutual funds, treasury bonds usually permitted, and penalties, as mentioned, are much stronger in the Ethics Act.
Despite this momentum and strong public support for a ban, why have past efforts stalled? What are the obstacles now?
History shows it's tough. Bills died under previous House speakers. Speaker Johnson's current stance here in early 2025 isn't fully clear. Just getting a floor vote is often the biggest hurdle.
Why? Is it opposition from members? Procedural issues?
Probably a mix. Some members with significant investments might resist. There can be procedural delays, disagreements between House and Senate versions if both pass something. Leadership control over what gets voted on is key.
But the public is overwhelmingly in favor.
Consistently. Polls show huge bipartisan majorities, often over 80–85%, supporting a ban on members trading stocks. That public pressure is significant.
So the central fight seems to be QBTs versus full divestment, reflected in the Trust versus Ethics Acts.
That's a major dividing line, yes. It really goes to the heart of how effective people believe blind trusts are. The choice between those approaches is fundamental to how impactful any reform would be and likely affects its political chances.
And the fact that bills with broad support still don't get votes. That says something.
It suggests powerful obstacles within the legislative process itself, perhaps reflecting the influence of those who prefer the status quo, or maybe just institutional inertia. It certainly raises questions about Congress's ability to police itself effectively without really sustained external pressure.
Okay, to wrap this up, what are the main takeaways from our discussion today?
I think the core points are: the issue of congressional wealth from stock trading and potential conflicts is persistent and serious. The Stock Act, while well-intentioned, has proven largely inadequate due to compliance issues, weak penalties, and the speech or debate clause barrier.
We see recurring patterns.
Yes, patterns of questionable trades around key events, frequent spousal involvement, defenses relying on advisors or debated blind trusts, and a lack of successful prosecutions. High-profile cases keep highlighting these vulnerabilities.
So what's your final assessment? Is structural reform genuinely needed?
Based on the evidence, yes. The status quo seems unsustainable for ensuring ethical conduct, preventing potential insider trading, and rebuilding public trust. Transparency alone hasn't cut it.
The cycle just continues.
Pretty much. Scandal, investigation, no prosecution, stalled reform. It points to a need for fundamental structural change. The current proposals like the Trust Act and Ethics Act are attempts at that, imposing real limits.
What would effective reform look like?
It likely needs stricter rules, maybe that full trading ban plus enhanced enforcement and penalties that actually deter, strong enough to overcome the internal resistance and the existing legal protections.
Of the outlook.
Uncertain. But it feels critical for market integrity and public faith in government. Without real change, the potential for profiting from congressional access will likely just keep causing controversy.
That's a really clear, if somewhat sobering, conclusion. And it leaves us with a final thought for you, our listener, to consider. Given the consistent, strong, bipartisan public support for banning congressional stock trading and the fact that multiple reform bills have been introduced, what do you think of the underlying reasons this keeps stalling? Is the legislative inaction itself maybe a symptom of that very systemic vulnerability we've been exploring today? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.